212, but we're going to take it just in the lace part. And like everything else with sewing, there's probably 10 ways to do something, and I'm just going to show you the way that I did it. So first, let's get started with how I laid out the plan so that I could have the angles and the points and everything that I wanted. So the first thing I want to do is get a good look at what the finished garment is supposed to look like. And what I see is these seams, and I see a whole bunch of gathers up here, knowing that this is the area I want to work in. So I just put a rough outline of the parts that are important to me for my design over here. And I knew the general shape that I wanted with, I like that whole look of points coming down a sleeve. And I just thought, well, I'll just tie it together and do it all three. So then I kind of like to flesh it out a little bit. So I know that this part, this front placket, is going to be the very front and center. So the first thing I want to do is make sure that the lace that I'm going to use is going to work for this. Now, this is a nightgown, not caring about modesty, it's just for fun. If I was doing this for a garment that I was going to be wearing in public, I would be making sure that I'm placing everything where nothing is going to be revealed that should not be revealed comfortably, or if it is revealed, how to underline it and things like that. So, just with that. But what I decided is that I needed the lace to come so that it would be a big dramatic lace, all right? I didn't want it to end right here. I wanted it to be lower, so I started it at the bottom and I came up. And then I could tell that I'm going to hit those sleeves, so I decided, well, at that point in the sleeves, I can come down, okay? And then I was trying to get a rough idea of how wide I wanted this thing to be. And I decided I kind of wanted it so it's just a big, almost a Charlie Brownish type thing, honestly, where it's way up here. It's a nice wide swath. I didn't have exact measurements at all on this. Okay, and so just kind of getting an idea like this beforehand will really help you, because the next step is marking everything out and planning it out on the flat pattern. So the piece I wanted to start with was the front. That's the main focal point. And I figure if I can get the front right, everything else I can guide off of that. And I knew I wanted a wide piece, and I knew approximately that I wanted it to start up at the very top corner and come down. So, and I was just guessing that 45-degree angles are lovely, so that's what I was going to go with. And I have a ruler that has different angles on it, which is handy. And I have my table here, and I got this big cover for it here. I got a coupon, so I got the whole cover thing for like $35, and it's really helpful. But that way I could strategically plan, so I could line up this edge with the straight and everything like that. So I found my point up here. Let me move this down. So I found my point up here that I wanted to start with. So from this point up here that I wanted to start with, I could line this up with the straight here and know that at a 45-degree angle, this is where it's going to be. So I just went ahead and drew it. And the red lines are the ones that I ended up going with. There's some other pencil lines on here when I was playing with stuff, but the red lines are where I ended up. Now, I marked the top, and just because I knew I wanted a wide lace, I marked a bottom line just along the bottom of my ruler. My lace ended up being a lot wider, but that doesn't matter. It's the top line that's critical for me right now. Okay, so now I have this line done. So now I have to carry it over to the sleeves. So I'm going to take my sleeve pattern here. Well, it's easier if I just flip it upside down. Match it up. So this notch to this notch, just to make sure. And I put a mark up here at the top where I need the line to start with at that front point. I'm not worrying about the back point, just at that front point. And that way I can make sure it ties in around this corner. So then, this is a very wide sleeve piece. And up here at the top, there's some little dots, and those dots mark the center of the shoulder of that sleeve. So what I did is I lined up those dots on a straight line, okay, and I made sure that the grain line was straight so that way I knew everything was according to plan. So from this point, with this on the straight and this mark only, I could then, using this guide that I have printed on my table and the 45-degree angle that I have on my ruler, I can use that as a guide, you know, placing that 45-degree going in line across and things like that to, well, first what I needed to do is find center. So these, backing up a second, these dots should line up with the center arm dot. That's just your placement dot for like thickest arm. So if you drew a line straight down, that's going to mark the center, okay? So once I had my pattern piece here, I could line up my starting point at a 45-degree angle from this line, okay? And so that's what I did, and I mark it here, and again, just for a reference, I marked to the bottom of my ruler. Then I knew I wanted 90 degrees, so I'm going to carry it over. So I'm going to mark from that point where this line meets the center line. I'm reflecting that over, so I have another 45-degree angle here, and I knew not where it would end, so I just drew it, and it ended, let's see if we can see here, about an inch below, and that is just fine. And again, I also drew the bottom hole. All right, so now I have this, and I have a reference point where I want it to meet my back seam. So then I can get my back piece here. And place it over, matching my notches. Okay, pretend these lines aren't here. And I have this line is from my sleeve. I can put this over it and I see, that's where I need this to start. So then, get rid of my sleeve pattern. And work on this back piece. So again, I'm lining up the fold with the grid on my table. These grids are so handy. And from that point that I placed, from this point up here that I placed, I'm drawing a line down that is 45-degree angle to this line, okay? So I'm going to put that down. And again, just for a reference, I put the bottom one, just so I can get an idea of how the lace would be placed. So that's it. So now every single seam is going to match up with the corresponding other seam, and it's going to be great. So what I'm going to show you is just on the sleeve. I'm not going to put the whole thing together again, but we're just going to use the sleeve as a reference. And basically how I do the lace on the sleeve is the same way that I did it for the other pieces. Okay, so the first thing I did then is I had all of my pieces, and I needed to get an idea of how much lace I needed to deal with. So I measured the longer side of each piece, and this one came to 23 inches exactly. Now, the front and the back were actually kind of similar. I think one was like 24, one was like 25, but that in general. So what I would recommend is you take what you think is your longest length and add 10 inches. So it's 23 inches that you think you're going to need. Bump it up to 33 inches, okay? Because when you're sewing your lace panels, things constrict with all of that stitching and stuff. And when you're cutting at angles, things can get wonky. So do yourself a big favor and cut it and make your lace strips extra long. Just saying. Okay, so that's what I'm thinking I'm going to need is a strip of lace that I'm going to say is at least 33 inches long. And I'm going to need 4 pieces of lace. One for the front, one for the back, and one for each sleeve. Okay, so I am making 4 strips, and I went ahead and I just made all 4 the same length. That way I wasn't guessing because I can always trim. Okay, I need 4 strips, and I'm going to, you know what, we're going to make it a yard just to be safe. We're going to bump it up to 36 inches long. Now I'm going to show you, I'm going to make 1 strip, and I'm going to do it the same as the nightgown that I did, but you can mix and match and do all kinds of stuff. So at this point, I'm just putting all of these patterns and everything aside, and I'm going to get out my lace stash and just get creative. So I have a bunch of lace I need to use up, and this has sounded like a good opportunity. So I have this, and it is just a very, very basic flat. One edge is design, one is flat lace. It's about 5/8 of an inch wide. So this, the type of lace that I wanted would have a flat edge on both sides. I did not have that, but I had all this. So what I'm doing is creating the lace I want by sewing the 2 together. Okay? So first thing I need to do, like I said before, I'm starting with a idea that I want my finished strip of lace, or at least the lace that I'm cutting, to be 36 inches long each time I cut it. So I am going to cut a length of this that is 72 inches. So twice 36. So right there, and I can fold it in half and get 72 because I'm going to be doubling it. And I want 2 of these panels in each strip. Okay, so I'm going to be cutting another one of these. And this is just for one. And again, use what lace you have. You know, it's a fun thing. It shouldn't be a stressful thing. And practice it by all means on the cheap lace that you just have laying around so that you can feel comfortable if you ever cut into the expensive stuff. So the next thing I'm going to do is iron my lace. And I'm ironing it because I need to starch it. Because when you're sewing this stuff, whether it's the lace or the little batiste inserts or something, you want it to have as much body as you can, as much stiffness as you can, so that it just works better. Oh dear, my lace is. So I'm just using a regular spray starch, nothing fancy. And I'm probably going to do a couple coats of this on the lace, maybe a front coat and a back coat, just to give it a little body. It's not going to be stiff. It's not going to be super stiff, but it's going to have a little bit better texture so that when you're sewing it, you can feel like you can control it a little bit better. Alrighty, so I had to change my thread and my needle. I just put a little bitty 9 needle in here because a 9 universal, that'll work for just about everything I need for this. And what I'm doing is I'm just lining them up together and zigzagging down, medium width zigzag, fairly close stitches. I have it like a 2 millimeter stitch, and I'm just trying to carefully but not fanatically guide it down. Now, depending on the design of your lace, you know, you can line it up differently. My design that I'm working on here, it's got these little half circles like on each side, and I'm lining it up so it kind of looks like a zigzag or a rickrack pattern. You can tell right there, so it looks kind of like a rickrack. But, you know, it's going to be moving, it's lace, so don't stress yourself too much, just sewing it together. And I start with the two cut ends. I'm leaving it as one long piece. I'm not cutting it into two pieces yet. When I get to the bottom, I'm just going to kind of flatten out that triangle and keep going straight and run it off the edge. Because sometimes when you're sewing, one side's going to feed a little more than the other side, and this way you know that it's going to end up at the right place, so no worries. So that's the one, and I'm going to go ahead and do the other piece just like this, and then we'll go to the next step. So the next thing I did is I've torn the strips of fabric for the connecting pieces that have the little pin tucks on them. And just like the lace, the first thing you want to do is iron it and starch it. So these strips are actually a little bit longer than the lace, but that's okay. So I'm going to put a couple of coats of starch on this and take it from here. Okay, so the way I attach my lace to the edge of my strip of fabric is I have a very short stitch length. I have it between a 1 and a 2. I have a fairly wide zigzag, and I place it so that the edge of my fabric is peeking out, you know, a little less than 1/8 of an inch, but I tore it so it's a little hairy, so you know it's not precise. And I'm running it so the center of my presser foot is running right at the edge of the lace. Okay, what that's doing is basically making a tiny little rolled hem along the edge of the lace, so that when you open it up, it's nice and finished, and there's no raw, well, that one thread hanging out there, of course, it has to be difficult, but there's no raw edges or anything peeking out, and it's just a really nice clean finish. So I'm going to go ahead and finish sewing on both of my strips of lace, sewing them to my long strip of fabric. Okay, so I have my lace sewn on, and what I want to do is press it so that the tiny seam allowance is going towards the fabric. You can use an iron, a regular iron, which will work fine. I just want to show you my little toy. This little thing here is called a VinMax puff iron. They're very hard to find. I think the company that made them burned down or something 20 or so years ago, but it's basically a little iron. It's made so you can put tiny little puff sleeves and things over it, but it's nice because I can just keep it here at the table and run my things I want to iron just over it like that, and it's going to press it for me. So if you ever find one, they're lovely. They are hard to find. I bought this one from a guy who bought it at an antique auction, so you never know. But I'm thinking you could probably do a very similar type of thing, just bolting like a curling iron, a wide curling iron or something onto a table or something. I don't know. I haven't tried that, but you know, it's just an idea. So now that I have this pressed over to the side, I'm going to come back and run a tiny top stitch just right along this side. It's going to just hold that seam allowance back and make it just a tiny bit stronger. Okay, so at this point I have my top stitching done, And I've come back with my ruler. I'm going to be doing 2 rows of pin tucks. So with my little heat erasable pen, I just put tape on my ruler where I want it to be so I don't have to think too hard. I'm just putting a couple dots, you know, maybe about 4 or 5 inches apart, all the way down my strips. So I have 2 rows of tiny dots. So what I'm going to do, I do have a very, very narrow foot that I can use for this, and I've used in the past, but I'm just going to use my regular foot because I can. So what I do is I fold it at my 2 dots, okay? Run it down my side really quickly, and that's going to give me my line for my pin tuck. And when I sew it, I'm just using a straight stitch. I am running the edge of my fabric along the inside of this little foot side over here, and let's just go for it. So I get up to this dot and pinch the next dot, give it a little crease, and move forward. And just keep working all the way down. And that's going to give me my nice little tuck right there. So I have my first row done, and I'm just going to go back up to the top and start the second row, folding it over at the first dot and the second one, and crease it just to get that edge started. And stitching it with the exact same way as I did the first. Okay, so I have my little strips with my pin tucks on them, and I'm just going to run it over my iron just to kind of press it open, and it's going to make these little red dots just disappear, which is nice. That's another reason I like using the heat erasable on these instead of water soluble and chalk and things. It cleans up really quick and really easy. Alright, so now at this point we've got these 2 strips done, and those are my outside strips. And on the nightgown that I made up, I just used a strip of this, actually it's hem binding lace, and put it down the middle. There's all kinds of options that you can do. I was just looking for something that, you know, had a pretty double edge, but if I wanted to go all white, you know, I could use just plain white going down the middle. You can use all kinds of things, honestly. It's just whatever you feel like, whatever you've got hanging around, play with it and enjoy. So I'm going to stick with the same one that I made before. And I have ironed and starched this, so it is a little bit firmer. Just enough that it's easier to handle, and there is a right side and a wrong side to this lace. If you can see, one side has more of like an embroidered edge on it, and I want to make sure that side is up. So when I am putting it on here, I'm going to make sure that those 2 sides are together, and again I am going to sew this exactly the same way. Now if I was going to use this lace, and I might just use this lace, there's a different technique that I think would work better for that, and that's almost doing it more like an applique, where, oops, this is the right side, where instead of doing this type, it takes a little more work, but you would have to run a short stitch, medium width type zigzag, and follow the contours of the edges, okay? And once you have that, then you can come back inside with little scissors and clip out anything, and you get a really nice effect that way, you know. But this time I'm just doing it this way. So just like this part now, I have sewn this on and pressed the tiny seam allowance over here towards this side, and I'm going to come back and just run a little row of top stitching just over that. Again, this is just more for strength right now, because on a garment like this I could see where it could get tugged or something. You might not need it. Whoops, straighten that stitch out. You might not need it, so every project is an original. So anyway, see, I'm just running down the very edge. Like that. I'm just running down the very edge of it, and then I will do the other side, sewing this piece onto this side in exactly the same way. So now we have the strip done, and I'm back here at my pattern piece, and I have it on a piece of fabric that is about the right size just for this piece. I find that working with just a single piece of fabric at a time is easier. So I am just going to place this on here, say, to get an idea if everything is going to be okay. This is where the center point is, so if I was to move that up here, would everything fit? And it will fit. So you can see having those extra inches really comes in handy. So don't cut yourself short when you do that. So the next step is I have this at a 45-degree angle. Oops, hang on a second. So you can see here, it should be a perfect square. And it is. So I need to make this a 45-degree angle. So what I'm going to do is fold it in half. You can see my ends aren't perfect, but I'm going to fold it roughly in half. And very carefully pin it so that everything is lined up. All the little seams are lined up with their corresponding matching seam on the opposite side. I'm not worrying too much about the pin tucks, but more the lace area here. Okay, so I have that. Now what I need to do is mark where that 45-degree angle is. So you can see on my board here, if I line up this corner with this line, I could just draw it like that. Or if you have a ruler that has a 45-degree angle, I line that line up with the edge. There's several ways, but the main point is at this stage is where I'm going to be mitering this thing. So I'm very carefully putting it there and getting, oops, hang on a second. Again, getting my heat erasable pen. I'm going to draw in my stitching line. Okay. Now, before I stitch, I'm going to come back and pin near that stitching line to make sure everything's going to hold together. Plus, I can open it up just to make sure before I sew that it looks like and it will match what I want it to. So, this is where I'm going to sew. My pins are just on the inside so I can open it up and get a rough idea of what this is going to look like. So I'm going to get my pattern piece again over here, place this on top of it just to make sure it's going to match. And I'm worrying about the top. I'm not worrying about the bottom lines. I'm just worrying about this top. If I put it along the top, do I have enough lace poking out the sides that it's going to be okay to cut? So I want to make sure that if I place this where I'm going to be wanting it, do I have enough lace to cover both sides? And I do, which is great. So I'm going to go back to my sewing machine and sew this stitch right here that I have marked. And one trick is when you're doing this lace up here and down here, sometimes, hang on a second. lace can be tricky. And just to make sure it doesn't get sucked into the feed dogs or something, I like to put a piece of paper under it. And so that way it'll sew for sure nice. And when you're all done, all your stitches are just going to perforate the paper and you can pull it right off. So I have sewed it. I did put my piece of paper under there. This is actually freezer paper, but you can use any piece of paper. You can use a checkout receipt, whatever you have handy. And you see it's just going to come right off, but that's going to help make everything more stable as you sew down. So now what I'm going to do, just double checking one more time to open it up. Yep, that's going to work. So I need to come back in here and slice this. And I'm going to be cutting it, giving myself a little more than 1/4 inch. Okay, so I have that. So now I need to go to the ironing board, and ironing will take my little mark away, plus then I can press this open all the way down. Okay, so now we have our piece that we know is going to work for this sleeve, and it's time to actually work on this fabric. We're trying to construct a piece of fabric that then we can just cut out. So what I do is first, the part that I'm going to work on, I actually outline it. So I'm just going to do up here around the arm, and I'm using my heat erasable pen again. As I do, I'm marking where the center is up here. Oopsie. Marking this point, and down just below the notches I think is fine. So what I'm going to do is I punched a hole down here where these 2 points meet. So I'm going to mark that hole, and I am marking lines up here on top where that 45-degree angle is going to be. So if I push this away, then what I can do is connect that top line and that circle, and oops, don't do that down there. That gives me a line that I know I can use to guide, and now I'm drawing a line from my circle to this top point and to this top point here. Okay. So now at this point, this is going to be on a bias, and it's important to me that it doesn't get stretched out of shape. So now understanding that I kind of do overkill, and it's a belt and suspenders, doing twice as much than I need to type of thing, what I am doing is I'm using my stay tape, this stuff here, and I am just going to fuse a piece just underneath that line that I drew, going both ways. I'm putting these just below those lines that I drew, and because I don't want these things to shift, I am going to put my little Teflon press thing on top of it. And over here. Can you see what I'm doing? Okay. So what these two strips are going to do, that's woven so it won't stretch, and so it's basically going to work to keep that bias from wanting to stretch at all. Now what I'm going to do is come back, and I'm going to cut straight down the middle. This is 1/2 inch wide, and I'm going to cut straight down the middle, so I'll have 1/4 inch on each side. Okay, so I'm not worrying about the bottom part right now. I'm only dealing with the top right now. So I have it, so I have a little, like 1/8 of an inch row of tape. I actually trimmed it a little more because I only want a little bit. I want about 1/8 of an inch showing. So now, this, so many steps, I know, but so now I have this little edge here, and what I'm going to do is go back to the ironing board again and turn it under just so this tape is just underneath and I have a nice edge. Okay, so now I have my piece here. I have my little 1/8 of an inch taped edge folded under, and it kind of wants to pooch out right now, but we're not going to let it. So, like I said in the beginning, there's a lot of different ways to do it. I'm just showing you the way I do. And the next step I'm going to use is this. This is a double-sided double-sided water-soluble basting tape. So what that means is no pins, and I can put it on nice and smooth. So I'm going to cut a strip long enough to do it, but I don't want it this wide. This is like a fat 1/8 of an inch. I want it skinny because if this stuff is sticking out from underneath the edge of the lace when I sew it, it'll get sticky on the bottom of my presser foot, and then there's a chance for it to, want to cause issues while I'm sewing. So I want it nice and thin. Now this stuff comes sticky on one side and a paper backing on the other. So what I'm going to do is put the sticky part face down, and I'm running it right along the edge. I have my edge, come on, get started here, folded. Okay. It doesn't want to go. And there we go. So I'm just pushing it down, and I have the paper side up and the sticky part down right now. And I'm just putting it down along the very edge of my folded edge. My goal for all of this to be able to put the lace on is flat and straight and unpuckered as possible, so that I can have a nice fabric to use. So I have my 2 tapes on here. Now what I'm going to do is come back and pull the paper off the top. So then I can pull off the paper, and the sticky stuff will stay here. And this sticky stuff, it'll disappear the first time you wash it. It's water soluble, so it'll just come apart. So now I'm pulling this off. So now I'm going to set my lace right on top of that basting tape. Okay, yeah, it looks like this thing is unfolding, but that's okay. I'll fix it when I sew. Okay, so I am placing the edge of my lace right on top of that double-sided basting tape. All right, and on this side. Okay, so this top part is stuck temporarily. So when I come back and sew it, I'm just going to make sure I have this folded up as I sew. And I'm going to be doing a zigzag stitch on the top of this little strip on the lace. Okay, so now I've zigzagged over this edge here, and this part is on. And now I can worry about the bottom part. So this has the other half of that tape, and I put a little notch at the very bottom corner, and I'm going to do the same thing where I press this under all the way up. And again, this tape is going to keep it from stretching out of sorts because it's on the bias. Now, if you're doing this type of thing on a piece on the straight, this isn't as necessary, and you can probably omit it. I'm just doing it because, don't want it to stretch. But one thing you want to check before you go any further is just to lay your pattern piece on here to make sure everything is still going to fit. So if I place this over here, okay, it's the top line that I'm worrying about. Remember, because the bottom one, my lace is actually a lot wider than what that is. So keeping everything from falling off here. What I'm trying to make sure is that I have enough room out here that things are good. If this piece was too short or something, what you would have to do is then come in deeper, cut another V deeper or something so that you can make sure you have enough room up there. But it looks like it's going to be fine. So I'm going to take this away and press these edges under. Now the side of the tape on the outside is the factory side of that tape. I trimmed the inside, so that's a little wobbly, but the outside is straight. So that's going to be my guide for when I iron it. So now I have this edge roughly pressed under, so I have a crease. And again, I'm going to use the same water-soluble basting tape. I'm going to cut a strip that's as long as I'm going to need. And cut that strip in half so I can use half of it on each side. So again, I am placing my basting tape here just at the edge of that fold, so it's up on top. And the paper is still on top. I'm just gluing the sticky side down. Okay, so this side will fold in like that, and my tape's on top. So let me pull the paper off the top of the tape with my little pin. Okay, so I got that off. Sometimes it's tricky to get it started. So I can peel that paper off. I'm going to do that on both sides. Now before I place this on, I want to make sure if I have any loose threads or anything coming out at the bottom, I get those trimmed off. And I can just very carefully place it at that tip. And again, just kind of pat it onto that tape all the way up. And that tape will hold it better than pins because it'll be nice and smooth and you can just sew straight over it. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew it exactly like I did up here, where I'm zigzagging on the top, but at the same time I am tucking that raw edge under. Now I'm not really worried about this part fraying. I have it taped, and also that zigzag, in case a few little threads come loose, it's not going to bother anything, but I feel really secure about that. So let me go sew this and I'll show you the final product. Alright, so this one is sewed on now too. Here's a close-up of what that looks like there. It's just a little zigzag and it's held on really nicely. And that's about it. So now you've had it strategized on how everything's going to work. And I can put my pattern piece exactly where I'm going to want it on here. Yeah, I make sure that this line here is following the center track of that piece, and just cut it out. And do the same process with all the pieces that need to join. And then just sew it together, because we already strategized exactly how they're going to match up when we're doing this line. So I hope that helps you. That's the way I did it, and I think it turned out really pretty, and this way makes sense to me, so I hope it made some sense to you too. If you have any questions, let me know. Bye-bye.